November 10, 1942. A 27-year-old shepherd's grandson lay motionless beneath a rusted water tank in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, his breath controlled to near invisibility in the -15-degree air. Vasily Zaitsev had been in this exact position for 11 hours, his Mosin Nagant rifle trained on a gap between collapsed walls 300 meters away. Somewhere in the labyrinth of shattered factories, SS-Standartenführer Heinz Thorvald, headmaster of the Wehrmacht Sniper Academy in Zosen, was hunting him with equal patience. The German High Command had sent their master instructor specifically to eliminate this former clerk from the Ural Mountains, this peasant marksman whose tally of enemy kills had become a propaganda embarrassment. What the Nazis failed to understand was that Zaitsev hadn't learned to shoot in any military academy. He'd learned by tracking wolves through Siberian forests, where a wasted bullet meant a hungry winter and hesitation meant death. Vasily Grigorievich Zaitsev grew up in Yeleninskoye, a settlement so remote that the nearest town required a full day's travel through taiga wilderness. His grandfather Andrei, a veteran hunter, placed a single-shot rifle in the boy's hands when he was barely tall enough to shoulder it properly. The lesson was stark and unforgiving. Each cartridge represented value beyond what their family could easily afford, so every shot needed to count. Miss your target? Go hungry. Wound instead of kill? Track it for hours through terrain that could freeze your fingers solid. By age 12, Vasily could read animal tracks like printed text, interpret wind direction from how snow settled on pine branches, and calculate bullet drop across ravines without conscious thought. He learned patience that outlasted the animals, sometimes remaining utterly still for hours until a wolf or elk forgot his presence entirely. When war erupted and the Red Army conscripted him in 1937, military bureaucrats assigned him to the Pacific Fleet as a clerk, filing paperwork in Vladivostok while his hunting skills gathered dust. For 5 years, he stamped documents and inventoried supplies, watching career soldiers drill with weapons while he calculated shipping manifests. The administrative posting felt like prison to someone who'd spent his youth moving freely through forests, and when Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, Vasily submitted transfer requests repeatedly. The Navy refused. Clerks were needed and riflemen were plentiful. But by September 1942, as German forces pushed toward the Volga River and Stalingrad transformed into humanity's bloodiest grinding stone, the Soviet Union needed every soldier capable of holding a weapon. Zaitsev's regiment crossed the Volga under darkness on September 22, 1942, packed into barges that German artillery crews used for target practice. Shells geysered water 50 meters high, capsizing boats and drowning soldiers before they glimpsed the city they'd come to defend. Those who reached the western shore scrambled up embankments into a landscape unrecognizable as human habitation. Stalingrad had been systematically obliterated. The Luftwaffe had firebombed residential districts until streets became rivers of flame. Then artillery had pulverized whatever structures remained standing. Industrial complexes like the Red October factory and the Barricadi gun plant stood as skeletal frameworks, their machinery twisted into abstract sculptures by high explosives. The September offensive had pushed Soviet forces into a strip of territory barely 3 kilometers wide at its deepest point, compressed against the Volga with nowhere to retreat. Average life expectancy for a newly arrived soldier was calculated at less than 24 hours. Wehrmacht commanders expected to finalize the city's capture within days, completing their thrust to the oil fields of the Caucasus. Instead, they discovered urban warfare transformed into something unprecedented in modern military history. Combat measured in meters rather than kilometers, where battles raged floor by floor within the same apartment building for weeks. Zaitsev received a standard Mosin-Nagant rifle and 40 rounds of ammunition, then got assigned to defend a cluster of ruins near the Lazar chemical plant. His commanding officer's briefing lasted 30 seconds. Hold this position, kill Germans, don't waste bullets. The directness matched everything Vasily had learned hunting. Identify your target, make the shot count, survive. On his third day, Zaitsev killed his first 2 Germans during a morning assault against Soviet positions. He'd positioned himself inside a water cistern with a sight line toward German trenches carved through a collapsed schoolyard. When Wehrmacht infantry advanced at dawn, most Soviet defenders opened fire immediately, desperate volleys that consumed ammunition while hitting nothing. Vasily waited, tracking a German officer who moved behind the assault line, directing troops with hand signals. The range was 270 meters, with crosswind gusting irregularly from the northwest. He'd observed this officer for 90 minutes the previous evening, noting his movement patterns and confidence. At 6:47 a.m., when the officer paused to point toward a Soviet machine gun nest, Zaitsev exhaled halfway and squeezed. The 7.62 millimeter round took the German through the upper chest, dropping him instantly. The assault faltered as subordinates scrambled to their fallen commander. 40 seconds later, when a sergeant attempted to drag the body to cover, Vasily's second shot removed that problem as well. The German attack disintegrated into retreat, soldiers abandoning the schoolyard they'd nearly captured. His company commander, Captain Viktor Goncharov, noticed that a rifleman had achieved results with 2 bullets while others had fired hundreds. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Goncharov asked during the evening lull. "Hunting in the Urals," Zaitsev replied, matter of fact. The captain studied this unassuming clerk turned soldier, recognizing something the army had overlooked. Within 2 days, Zaitsev received permission to operate independently as a designated marksman, selecting his own positions and targets rather than simply holding trench lines with the infantry. If you're hooked on how this shepherd from the Urals transformed into Stalingrad's deadliest hunter and want more forgotten tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things under impossible pressure, smash that like button. It really helps these stories reach more people. And if you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Zaitsev quickly established patterns that multiplied his effectiveness beyond simple marksmanship. He began each day by studying German positions through binoculars salvaged from a dead officer, mapping movement routines and identifying high-value targets, officers, machine gunners, artillery observers. He noticed Wehrmacht soldiers grew careless during certain hours, particularly mid-morning when they believed Soviet forces were too exhausted from night fighting to mount attacks. That carelessness created windows of opportunity. He also recognized that firing from the same position twice guaranteed death. German counter-snipers would zero in on any repeated muzzle flash or sound signature. So he constructed multiple shooting nests throughout his sector, sometimes 4 or 5 different locations prepared simultaneously. One might be a gap between steel beams in a factory wall, another behind rubble arranged to create a firing slit that appeared natural, a third inside a bombed-out rail car positioned to overlook a German supply route. He'd take 1 or 2 shots from a position, then immediately relocate before enemy observers could triangulate his location. When possible, he timed his shots to coincide with artillery explosions or aircraft flyovers, masking the sound. He learned which materials deflected bullets unpredictably. Firing through twisted metal or shattered concrete could send rounds off target by crucial centimeters. Glass fragments from blown-out windows became both camouflage and liability, glinting in sunlight to betray positions. October brought the first snow, and Zaitsev adapted by draping himself in white cloth torn from bedsheets, becoming invisible against the frost-covered debris. By late October, Zaitsev's confirmed kill count approached 90, verified by witnesses and documented through Soviet military intelligence. Each elimination had been a Wehrmacht soldier advancing toward the Volga, threatening to collapse the final Soviet defensive positions. But the kills represented something beyond tactical value. They demonstrated that individual skill could still matter in industrial-scale slaughter, that the Red Army possessed soldiers capable of defeating German military excellence on personal terms. Political officers from the Stalingrad front headquarters recognized propaganda potential in Zaitsev's success. War correspondent Vasily Grossman interviewed him for Red Star newspaper, crafting articles that portrayed the humble hunter as emblematic of Soviet determination. The son of peasants and workers, armed with the weapons of the people's state, defeats fascist arrogance, Grossman wrote. The story spread through military newspapers and radio broadcasts, reaching Soviet citizens desperate for heroes amid catastrophic losses. Factory workers and collective farmers learned about this ordinary man holding the line against Hitler's supposedly invincible war machine. The propaganda campaign extended into practical military application. Zaitsev began training other soldiers in marksmanship and camouflage techniques, passing along lessons learned tracking game through Ural forests. He emphasized patience above all else. Wait for the right shot rather than taking 10 wrong ones. The rabbit that escapes today might return tomorrow. The bullet wasted today is gone forever. 6 students formed the core of his training group, including Anatoly Chekhov and Viktor Medvedev, both factory workers from the Urals who'd never hunted but possessed steady nerves and discipline. Within 3 weeks, his students accounted for 37 confirmed kills of their own, multiplying Zaitsev's impact across the battlefield. Wehrmacht intelligence officers monitoring Soviet radio broadcasts and captured documents noticed the recurring name, Zaitsev. Analysis revealed a pattern of targeted eliminations in the factory district sectors. Officers, machine gun crews, and artillery spotters killed with precision that suggested professional sniper operations. The realization troubled German commanders. Their own sniper doctrine emphasized trained specialists operating from prepared positions with superior optics. Yet this Soviet marksman was achieving comparable results with standard infantry equipment. The psychological impact extended beyond casualty statistics. German soldiers grew hesitant to expose themselves in sectors where Zaitsev operated, slowing assault momentum and complicating coordination. Rumors spread among Wehrmacht ranks about a ghost shooter who never missed, exaggerating his capabilities into near supernatural threat. To counter both the tactical problem and propaganda embarrassment, the German High Command made an unusual decision: deploy SS-Standartenführer Heinz Thorvald, director of the Wehrmacht sniper school at Zossen. Thorvald arrived in early November with a reputation built on Eastern Front kills numbering over 400, mostly Soviet officers eliminated during the opening months of Barbarossa. He carried a Carabiner 98K fitted with a 6x Zeiss scope, wore custom camouflage tailored to urban environments, and had trained dozens of snipers who'd become legends in their own units. His assignment was explicit: locate and kill Vasily Zaitsev, then remain in Stalingrad to eliminate other Soviet sharpshooters. Thorvald studied intelligence reports about Zaitsev's operating patterns, analyzed shooting positions identified through witness accounts, and began his own reconnaissance of the factory district. November 9th marked the first engagement in what would become a 4-day duel. Zaitsev arrived at his observation post before dawn, a partially collapsed warehouse overlooking German positions near the Red October factory. Through binoculars, he scanned for targets, methodically checking known German sniper nests and officer positions. Something felt wrong. The usual careless exposure he'd come to expect was absent. Wehrmacht soldiers moved with unusual caution, staying behind full cover and avoiding patterns. A German lieutenant who normally appeared at his command post around 8 a.m. didn't show. At 9:15, Zaitsev spotted movement in a bombed-out apartment building 600 meters northeast, too brief and controlled to be accidental. Professional movement. Someone was hunting the sector with the same methodology Vasily used. He remained motionless, controlling his breathing and studying the distant building for any additional tells. 45 minutes later, he caught a glint of reflected light from a third-story window, there and gone in an instant. Glass wasn't uncommon in ruins, but this reflection had geometric precision, likely a scope lens catching sunrise at a specific angle. Zaitsev had located his hunter. Rather than engaging at extended range through rubble that could deflect his shot, he chose patient observation, logging the position and withdrawing to analyze the threat. That evening, he discussed the encounter with fellow sniper Nikolai Kulikov, who'd also noticed unusual German behavior. They agreed they were facing someone different, trained, experienced, and specifically tasked with eliminating Soviet snipers. The next morning, Zaitsev set a trap. He and Kulikov positioned a helmet on a stake in a shell crater, creating the appearance of a careless soldier taking cover. November 10th, 6:30 a.m. Zaitsev and Kulikov occupied separate positions 70 meters apart, both with clear views of the helmet decoy. They waited in absolute silence as dawn illuminated the ruins. At 7:15, a single shot rang out. The helmet jerked backward as a bullet punched through. Zaitsev marked the muzzle flash origin, third floor, northwest corner of the apartment complex he'd identified the previous day. The German had taken the bait but revealed his position. Zaitsev couldn't risk a shot. The German would be repositioning immediately, and firing at an abandoned position would only reveal his own location. Instead, he waited. Hours passed. The temperature dropped to -15°C, frost accumulating on exposed metal and stone. Zaitsev's muscles ached from maintaining perfect stillness, but movement meant death, either from the cold or from a German bullet. At 2:40 p.m., with shadows lengthening across the ruins, he spotted movement again, a subtle shift in the collapsed wall rubble, barely perceptible. The German had relocated to ground level, seeking a different angle. Zaitsev tracked the movement, waiting for a clear shot, but the German was equally cautious, never fully exposing himself, always maintaining cover. As twilight approached, both snipers withdrew without firing again. November 11th repeated the pattern: positioning, observation, psychological warfare. Thorvald demonstrated his training by never falling into predictable behaviors, constantly varying his approach and timing. Zaitsev countered by doing the same, creating a chess match where each move risked instant death. On the third day, Thorvald wounded a Red Army soldier in a courtyard adjacent to Zaitsev's sector, using the wounded man's cries to draw out Soviet medics or sentimentally motivated rescuers. November 12th, early morning, Zaitsev took an unprecedented risk. He positioned himself beneath a destroyed water tank, with Kulikov acting as spotter from a separate location. They'd analyzed Thorvald's pattern over 3 days and identified a probable next position, a pile of steel plates near a collapsed smokestack that offered excellent sight lines towards Soviet positions. The gamble was that Thorvald would recognize the water tank as a likely Soviet sniper nest and focus attention there, creating a predictable engagement scenario. At 8:30 a.m., Kulikov gave a subtle signal, hand barely visible moving a piece of cloth. The German was in position, exactly where they'd predicted. But Zaitsev couldn't see him. The angle was wrong from his current location. For 6 hours, he didn't move, waiting for the German to make the critical mistake all humans eventually make, adjusting for comfort or shifting to relieve cramped muscles. At 2:15 p.m., sunlight angle changed, casting new shadows across the ruins. Thorvald shifted slightly to maintain shadow cover, a movement of perhaps 10 centimeters, rotating his position to follow the shadow line. It exposed his head for less than 2 seconds. Zaitsev had been tracking that exact spot through his scope for 20 minutes, anticipating the shift. He didn't need to aim. His rifle was already zeroed on the position. Exhale, squeeze. The Mosin Nagant cracked. Through the scope, Zaitsev saw the German's head snap backward, the Zeiss scope tumbling from lifeless hands. Thorvald, the master instructor from Zossen who'd trained an entire generation of Wehrmacht snipers, died instantly from a single shot fired by a shepherd's grandson who'd learned marksmanship hunting Siberian wolves. Zaitsev remained in position for another hour, ensuring the kill was genuine and not a decoy tactic. When no further movement came from the German position, he sent scouts forward after nightfall to confirm. They returned with Thorvald's rifle, scope, and identification papers, verification that the Wehrmacht's best had been eliminated. The Zeiss scope became a trophy that Zaitsev used for the remainder of the Stalingrad campaign, fitted to his Mosin Nagant through improvised mounting. Soviet propaganda machinery seized the victory with predictable enthusiasm, crafting narratives about German arrogance defeated by proletarian skill. Pravda ran headlines proclaiming "the hunter defeats the hound," while political officers used the story to boost morale throughout the Stalingrad front. For Zaitsev himself, the duel represented validation of something deeper, that method learned through necessity in Siberian wilderness, patience, observation, adaptation, could prevail against formal military training and superior equipment. He continued operating in Stalingrad through November and December, his confirmed kill count eventually reaching 225 before a mine explosion in January 1943 severely damaged his eyes. Fragments from a German S-mine detonation left him temporarily blinded, requiring evacuation to a Moscow hospital for multiple surgeries. Professor Vladimir Filatov, the Soviet Union's leading ophthalmologist, operated on Zaitsev's eyes using experimental techniques that gradually restored vision over 4 months. By May 1943, Vasily had recovered enough to return to duty, though his vision never fully regained its previous sharpness. The Red Army recognized his value as instructor rather than frontline sniper, assigning him to train new marksmen using methodologies he'd developed in Stalingrad's ruins. Rather than retirement after his injuries, Zaitsev insisted on continued combat service. He participated in the Battle of the Dnieper in autumn 1943, operating as a reconnaissance officer and occasional sniper when opportunities presented. His role evolved from individual hunter to tactical advisor, helping commanders understand how trained marksmen could shape battlefield dynamics beyond simple casualty counts. He identified positions where snipers could disrupt enemy communications, eliminate artillery observers, and create psychological pressure that slowed German offensive momentum. Throughout 1944, as Soviet forces pushed westward toward Germany, Zaitsev trained hundreds of sniper students at military schools in Kyiv and later in Poland. His teaching methodology emphasized fundamentals over technology, reading terrain, understanding human psychology, controlling breathing and heartbeat under stress, and above all, exercising patience. German equipment is often superior, he told students, but equipment doesn't think. You must outthink your opponent, not outshoot them. He also refined counter-sniper tactics, developing doctrines for identifying and eliminating enemy sharpshooters that became standard Red Army procedure. His students went on to account for thousands of enemy casualties across the Eastern Front's remaining campaigns. In January 1945, Zaitsev participated in the Vistula-Oder offensive as part of reconnaissance units pushing toward Berlin. By war's end, in May 1945, he held the rank of captain and had received the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, the nation's highest military honor, for his Stalingrad service. His wartime experience totaled 3 years of frontline combat across multiple campaigns, during which he personally accounted for 225 confirmed kills and trained snipers who multiplied that impact many times over. After demobilization in 1945, Zaitsev returned to civilian life, initially working as a factory director in Kyiv, managing industrial production with the same methodical precision he'd applied to warfare. He married Zinaida Sergeyevna, a fellow veteran who'd served as a medical officer, and they raised 2 sons. He remained largely silent about his wartime experiences for years, uncomfortable with hero worship and preferring private life to public recognition. In 1956, he published a memoir titled Notes of a Sniper, providing rare first-person documentation of Stalingrad's ground-level reality. The book avoided propaganda rhetoric, instead offering technical insights into marksmanship, camouflage, and the psychological dimensions of sniper warfare. It became required reading at Soviet military academies and influenced sniper training programs worldwide. Western military analysts studied his techniques, recognizing that Zaitsev had pioneered urban sniper tactics that remained relevant decades later. He participated in veterans organizations throughout the 1960s and 70s, advocating for proper recognition of Stalingrad survivors and working to establish memorials. His final decades were spent in Kyiv, where he lived modestly despite his fame, occasionally lecturing at military institutions but generally avoiding publicity. Zaitsev died on December 15, 1991, at age 76, just as the Soviet Union dissolved around him. His stated wish was to be buried in Stalingrad, on Mamayev Kurgan, the hill where some of the battle's fiercest fighting occurred. That request was honored in 2006 when Russian authorities reinterred his remains at the War Memorial Complex in Volgograd, Stalingrad's current name. His grave overlooks the city he defended, marked by a simple stone identifying him as hero of the Soviet Union. The duel with Thorvald, whether embellished by propaganda or factually accurate in all details, symbolizes a larger truth about Stalingrad. Individual human courage and skill mattered even amid industrial-scale violence. A shepherd's grandson from the Urals, armed with basic equipment and lessons learned hunting for survival, proved capable of defeating the Wehrmacht's finest specialists through patience, intelligence, and absolute dedication. That remains his legacy, not just the confirmed kills or medals, but the demonstration that training, methodology, and disciplined thought can overcome material disadvantages and institutional arrogance. Every modern sniper program, from American military scout schools to police SWAT training, owes some debt to principles Zaitsev refined in Stalingrad's ruins. His story endures because it's fundamentally human, an ordinary person pushed into extraordinary circumstances who responded by doing what he knew best, perfected through years of necessity in Siberian wilderness, now applied to humanity's most desperate struggle. If this story of how patience and skill forged in Siberian forests became the weapon that defeated Nazi Germany's finest marksmen moved you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps the algorithm share these histories with people who need to hear them. Subscribe and tap the notification bell so you catch the next deep dive into forgotten heroes who changed history through courage and determination. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Did anyone in your family serve in World War II? What other untold stories should we explore? Your engagement keeps these real people and their incredible sacrifices from fading into forgotten footnotes. Thanks for watching and for helping ensure that warriors like Vasily Zaitsev are remembered not just as statistics, but as human beings who faced impossible odds and prevailed through intelligence, discipline, and unbreakable will. See you in the next one.